To that place, meaning more community?
More community, safe community, a vibrant community, a community that's thriving and prospering, where people actually love each other, care for each other, and look out for each other.
That day is coming.
I'm looking for that day.
I'm looking for that day too, and it's going to take a lot for us to get there, because as our chief has said, it's a few bad apples that terrorize our neighborhoods, and sadly our own residents are scared within our communities. We know the young people that are engaging in these crimes, we know their parents, and people are fearful to come forward. So what has to happen is we have to remove that fear. We have to get parents and adults and community residents to understand that these are our children, and we can, first of all, cannot fear them, but we have to embrace them. We have to go in and start talking to parents and others and find out what is happening in these households that's causing these young people to go off course and bring them back on course. Whether it's a job, whether it's some level of abuse, substance, alcohol, etc. We have to help these families, because that is the only way we can begin to heal from a broken system that has not embraced all children and all people in our community. So I think it can happen, but it has to start with us accepting the responsibility and the role that we all play. Although we may not be their biological parents, but they're still our children regardless. And I think we've lost that from the 60s compared to now.
No, and I think that's a wonderful answer. And I have a series of additional questions, but I'm going to call our co-facilitator, Pastor Q, who has some of her own questions. And then I'm going to return, but we're going to stay on this conversation here.
Thank you. And I want to acknowledge our Bronx-based Department of Probation. We have both chiefs here. Would you stand up, Chief Sawyer, Chief Williams? Can we give them a hand? And we have a few other staff members. Would you stand as well? Our probation officers that have come with us. It's always great to have them with us. They've been incredible partners. I want to ask the first question and Commissioner Bermudez will be here, she is on her way, for Councilwoman Vanessa Gibson. As the Public Safety Chair, you have the power to shape the conversation regarding what safer communities actually look like. The faith community is really tired of a one-sided approach to public safety that prioritizes law enforcement over community development, especially as it relates to young people. How do you plan to include a community perspective on public safety? And I have another follow-up question to that, but I'll just let you answer that one first. And how can you use your position to facilitate more effective partnerships between law enforcement and the faith-based community?
So one of the things that has been established 2 years ago at the council is an anti-gun task force, a task force to combat gun violence. And every month the task force meets at City Hall. This is something that was done prior to my election. So what I'm looking to do now that we are in the midst of a budget season, which means resources that we have to advocate for to come to our communities. Because while we do all this talking about all this great work and things we want to do, we have to have resources to go right along with it in order to make the difference in terms of bringing the jobs and all the programs. So what I would like to do as chair of PS, and certainly can do, is to work with clergy members and bring in key community residents. The challenge for me is that although I represent the Bronx, I have to look at this from a city perspective. So I've been working with my fellow colleague, Liz Crowley, who chairs fire and criminal justice. And she's been doing a lot of work with Fire Department, EMT 9/11, as well as Rikers Island, which is under her committee. So I think it's good to develop this type of a task force, because there are a lot of initiatives at the City Council that we in the past have done to spearhead our priorities. So if it's anti-gun violence, we have put money in line items in the budgets that would focus on programs like Save Our Streets, like Mothers on the Move, and all the other good organizations that are in the community on the ground doing work. So I have been having those conversations, but we are looking to do something more formal to put together a task force that represents all of New York City with community and clergy as well.
Okay, thank you. The follow-up question as for you, and then I'm going to go on to our ECO. How can you ensure that city and state funding is being reinvested in the community with minority community-based organizations as either contract recipients or subcontracted partners?
So the budget for the state has already passed on April 1st, and the state has a separate MWBE program that's different from New York City. New York City's program has traditionally not provided sufficient contracts to minority and women-owned businesses, as well as DBE and LBE, which is disability and local. Our controller, Scott Stringer, has made an effort to focus on looking at a lot of the contracts that are being awarded through the procurement process, and we as a city council are taking a much more aggressive approach, because we in the city are not even at 10%. If you look at the billions of dollars of contracts awarded by city agencies, we are less than 5% of MWBE, and that certainly is very unacceptable to many of us. So what we need to do are two things. We need to really, as a council, oversee agencies and how they are dispersing contracts to vendors. And number two, we in our communities have to do a lot more to educate our small businesses about becoming certified MWBEs, because many of them do not know the process and they don't get any assistance. The small business department also has to do more to work with our businesses in terms of certification of MWBE. But we are making it a priority. It has not been, and we could do a lot better in the city.
Okay, so we're talking MWBE as well as minority community-based organizations. Yes. So you're making, so you're saying that you're going to help facilitate that piece, obviously, along with comptroller and the various council people. Right. In addition, we're to look for in the future a greater collaboration between the law enforcement as well as the faith community via the commission that you said was formed, the newly formed commission about 2 years ago. Okay, so my follow-up question, and the last one to you before I go on, is can you help facilitate the process of justice reinvestment in the community from monies such as asset forfeitures?
That's a good question. It's something that people have come to me about, but I haven't really delved into it too much. But I'm looking to see how we can provide more scrutiny in that area on asset forfeiture. You're talking about in terms of when assets are retrieved after someone's arrested and where that money goes. Exactly. I do know, and I speak from another district attorney in the city, when that money is retrieved, it should, and I believe you can correct me, it should go back into the community, and that's how we have a lot of the gun buyback programs and some of the other initiatives. And each DA obviously has lots of different vision, and I've been working with all five, and our Bronx DA is certainly working with to see how we can improve a lot of those programs, because there are, there's a teen centers and concept program. There's a lot of stuff the DA does, but I don't think it gets out to the community as it should, and we can obviously do a lot better.
Okay, great. So we be committed to continuing this conversation and moving forward and strategizing together on how we can better implement these things that we as faith communities see as our most pressing needs. For our ECO, Terrence, I want you to first, before I give you a question, is to give us an overview of what does an ECO do for their borough. What is the ECO? What do you do?
Executive officer. Consider me like a vice president. I'm Joe Biden.
Oh, you're Joe Biden?
I wouldn't use him as an example.
He's next in line.
That's my job is basically to help out the commanding officer, whoever it may be. Like I said, this is the fourth one I've worked with here in the Bronx. So it's kind of to bring the historical perspective into what's going on in the borough. We oversee all of the precinct commands, so the commanding officers all report to us. We bring them in for meetings. So basically all the cops and civilians that work within Control Borough come up the chain of command to us. Okay. We are the executive level of the borough.
Okay, thank you very, very much. My follow-up question is, the faith community is thankful that the de Blasio administration has pledged to reduce stop and frisk and improve police-community relationships. We've seen a reduction in recorded stops, but we still see far too much of the same police practices of targeting, especially our young men of color on minor offenses. We also see a need for effective partnerships that go beyond the explorers, the precinct council meetings, and other existing programs that doesn't necessarily get to the heart of improving relationships and reducing police abuses. What do you plan to do differently that is not already being done so that we can move forward in this?
All right, a couple of different things. One thing that we started a few years back on, it's lost its way, and we're looking to restart. It's called the JRIP program, Juvenile Robbery Program, where we want to look at the kids under the age of 16 that are in the juvenile system. These are kids that, again, can go one way or the other. And it's something that I started in another place, and we just put a new sergeant in place for the unit. And this is something I'm going to reach out to everyone in this room for. When we identify these kids, we want to, besides us going and trying to mentor them, maybe getting some one-on-one mentorships from someone in this room. So I'm going to be looking forward to maybe someone here, once we identify. I think we have 52 kids right now that we've identified throughout the Bronx. These are kids who, 13, 14 years old, that have stolen a cell phone maybe once or twice. Not someone that's going to be going into the criminal justice system, but he's on that wrong path. Maybe we can now reach out to him. There's only so much as a police officer they're going to listen to us. If I can hook up my sergeant with some people in different communities, now that we have this kid, and say, hey, listen, how about Reverend so-and-so? How about we go sit down with his parents? But that's the other thing. We want to reach out to the parents. And we're going to look at a kid, and you're going to see whether or not it's a receptive parent, if it's a household, a stable household, or is it a household where everyone else is, had a history of violence. And we want someone to be able to reach out to these kids. So this is something, anyone that's interested in getting involved can give Sergeant Cuevas a number. And it's Sergeant Tony Ortiz. I just put him into this unit last week. This week, actually, is his first week starting. And then he'll reach back to you. And as we move forward, this is something that, we're going to have to sit down with whoever wants to be involved to figure out the best way to get back to work.
I really like that idea. I really like that plan for us to partner, because we do have some partners like Community Connections for Youth that actually create the alternatives. They actually, I think the 48th precinct, when they do hit a problem child, they do give them to the CCFY to run the intervention piece. So we will be very much interested in sitting down as the clergy roundtable to talk about where it's needed the most and how we can partner on that.
I know in Brooklyn and some of the housing developments, they were able to get community rooms for usage, where now the mentors and the people would go and meet with the kids, give the kids a place to go to. So these are all different ideas that we can start bouncing around. And listen, the ideas aren't all going to come from us. It's going to come from you guys. Absolutely.
So we'll go further on that piece as we move along. My last question to you, before we open it up to the audience, is giving it back to Divine. And we've had a problem in the area. I don't know if you have a representative here. I've asked for someone from human trafficking to be here. We've had a problem in the Bronx, actually citywide problem. We've had about over 2,200 children, lost to sex trafficking in the Bronx. I'm not talking Africa. I'm talking the city. Okay. And then we've had some very recent incidences, as it relates to that. And it's really in between that and our domestic violence cases. And we know we're sitting in a location that is very high in domestic violence. And we know we had 3,000 reports in Co-op City alone regarding that. And we've experienced over 7 years about almost 800 deaths. And so when we look at that piece, knowing worldwide every minute, we have 2 children lost to sex trafficking. So how many minutes have we been here? So it's something that we need to do a better job in our city. 2 weeks ago, you got Queens teenagers trying to snatch 10 and 11-year-olds off the streets, broad daylight. Obviously, there's a lot of money in that. They weren't successful in one neighborhood, so they drove around to the next and attempted it again. We used to have some programs here that we no longer have. Part of the reason we don't have it is once they become visible and doing such a great job, we find that those perpetrators wait on the outside of these quote-unquote safe havens to recruit. So it becomes even more dangerous. And we know that even in our Hunt Point area, the industrial area, it's very high. On July 30th, we plan to have a conference surrounding this, a borough-wide conference. All 5 boroughs are coming, citywide conference. All 5 boroughs are coming together here in the Bronx to tackle that issue. I really need to create a strong working relationship with your folks here in the Bronx, along with our newly formed New York City Faith Coalition Against Human Trafficking and Domestic Violence, so that we can create some real change in that area. Obviously, we're not going to eradicate it 100%, but there are some things we can do as far as reducing deaths on domestic violence and reducing the numbers of children being taken. So can you speak to that just for a moment?